Let me introduce you to a whole new world for UK energy. This report from NESO, the National Energy Systems Operator, an organisation set up by Milliband on the 1st of October 2024. And it gives advice on how we're going to get clean power in Britain by 2030. In just one report, it explains the need for incredible miracles, enormous amounts of money, and a lot of gas. Well, hello everybody. This report that has been produced by NESO really does lay out the plan to 2030. And any rational person with any knowledge at all looking at this report would realise that for it to happen, it requires a number of miracles. It requires, well, incredible eye-watering amounts of money, and it actually needs an awful lot of gas. But first, I'll point out how this was presented to you by Ed Milliband, because it's an example of pure deception. Today we have received independent advice from NESO Energy on our clean power mission. Their report provides conclusive proof that clean energy by 2030 is not only achievable but desirable and can lead to cheaper electricity and a more secure energy system for Britain. So this is totally independent advice. This is confirmation that Ed is so right. So let's look at that independent advice. Well, all we have to do to find out who controls National Energy System Operator Limited, NESO, is to go to Companies House and look who controls it. And there we are. It's the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. And who is that? Well, it's our friend here, Ed Milliband. So Ed Milliband controls the organisation that's giving independent advice to none other than himself. But it gets worse. Let's look at that tweet again. He claims their report, as if it's them, it's actually his, their report provides conclusive proof that clean power by 2030 is not only achievable, but desirable and can lead to cheaper electricity and more secure energy system for Britain. So let's examine that report and let's examine the facts on this. So those are the 4 claims, and we'll examine all of them and more. But I need to explain something first. Right, so to explain this report, you've got to understand what happened. Ed Milliband bought this company from the National Grid, then reconstituted it. So he, in effect, as the Secretary of State, is the 75% stakeholder. Okay, so he controls it. Then he asked them to produce a report. Now the choice is, they produce a report that's totally honest and said, well, Ed Milliband, you're nuts. There's no way this makes any sense at all. And you could do that report in a few sentences. But they wouldn't survive long, would they? Or they could do a report full of verb copy and paste stuff, full of technical stuff, but within it, tell the truth, so they're covered. And is he intelligent enough to spot that? Well, frankly, no. He has no understanding of anything technical at all. He's just a fanatic without any understanding, and he's imposing huge costs on our society and doing away with industries. The next industry to go after the steel will be our car industry, and not only just us, but the car industry in Europe. We could be a shining light instead of destroying industries, but no, he's going to carry on. So back to this report, and we're now going to look upon it from that perspective. Hidden in the report is the truth, but he hasn't spotted it yet. And the first subject I'm going to take is how this net zero future to 2030 and beyond can actually happen without gas. Because as I've explained in many videos, for even the 9-day example I often take, you'd need 7,200 gigawatt hours to replace the low wind. Now, that's a lot. And all the figures you look at on how you can replace that come to nothing. Pump storage is next to nothing. Batteries are next to nothing. So they've got to replace it with gas, the only thing that can stand in its place. So what do? You're going to treble the offshore wind, you're going to double the onshore wind, you're going to do all these things, but you still need the gas, because at times the wind and solar produce nothing. So let's look for how they've hidden the real truth inside this report on gas. Now I'm going to dive into the report and take chapters like this, and then I'm going to put them into plain English and lift out the significant points with quotes. Under the heading of supporting the continuation of unabated gas for security of supply. Well, I'm going to first explain that term unabated gas. In plain English, unabated gas refers to a gas power plant that does not capture and bury its CO2. In other words, a normal gas power station. So the quote is, and it's a surprising one, gas generation, the unabated type, mind you, gas generation will play a vital role in ensuring security of supply in 2030 and beyond. So in other words, we're going to continue using gas power plants, and that is into the long-term future. That's not what you thought, is it? The simple reason is that there is no alternative. There's no alternative storage of energy that's anywhere near possible. But gas. For every megawatt of renewables you build, you need a megawatt of gas. And the next quote. As gas generators will run at significantly lower load factors than today, we would expect them to become more dependent on revenue support from the capacity market or an alternative such as strategic reserve mechanism. So what they're saying here, I'll decipher that in plain English. Because gas now, even though we have a power plant, we've got to have all those power plants still in gas, they will not be running efficiently. We'd only use part of what they have, but they're still got to be there. So this is going to cost more. So it's now uneconomic. So we've got to find a way of subsidizing them. So in other words, what we're doing is building a renewable resource right alongside the existing gas resource. And in fact, as we swap over to using more electricity instead of what we call fossil fuels, of course, we'll need more gas stations. And actually, we are building some with the excuse that it can be changed over to hydrogen in the future. That's not feasible, actually, but it's current excuse. So there we are. We now know what's happening. We're building an additional energy system costing hundreds and hundreds of billions, in fact, trillions by the end of it. And we carry on with this, quoting, the future of the capacity market and/or the introduction of a strategic reserve should be considered alongside wider market reforms through REMA programme. As part of this, it'll be important for the government, NESO and Ofgem to constantly monitor the effectiveness and value for money of any arrangements, ensuring there is a plan in place to manage the impact of plant exits from the market on a capacity adequacy. That means that you've got to make sure in the future someone figures this out, all this, and we really can't close plants too early, because if we do, we're going to really muck up the system. There won't be enough electricity. That's what that means. It goes on to say, a decision is needed in time for the publication of the capacity market parameters in July 2025. Capacity market parameters, what percentage you expect to get out of each source. Now, a modern gas station can give, say, 65% of the energy coming in gas going out in electricity. But if you're going to actually throttle it down and only use it as a spare, then you only get maybe 20% or 15%. And you've got to decide. This section here, these paragraphs, completely duck the issue. And they say you've got to solve this problem by July 2025. And it's now November 2024. At this point, it should be noted that in the UK, there are 46 natural gas power plants and just under 35 gigawatts of installed gas power capacity. That means it can output, let's call it 35 gigawatts. That's a rate it can output at, but it can do that all the time. And of course, this is against the 2022 plan here to halve the amount of gas stations. In other words, reduce the amount of gas stations. So how many gas stations do we need according to this NESO report? Well, here's another quote from the report on that subject. This will require that even as the use of gas generation drops to very low levels, most of today's gas plants remain on the system out to 2030 and beyond. Appropriate arrangements will need to be in place to ensure these plants remain open, but do not run excessively, such as to provide power for export. Well, what they're saying is you've got to keep all the staff there, you've got to keep all the structure there, you've got to keep the gas going to fill in for all those days and all those times when they haven't got any power coming through from the intermittent supplies. And by the way, this can happen even through the years. You can get, for example, a 20% variation from year to year in the amount of wind you get. And the only way you can do that is to have gas plants. But the trouble is you need a megawatt of gas for every megawatt of intermittent. In the end, that's what you need. Even the Royal Academy of Engineering weighs in with its own assessment of Milliband's chances. Its verdict? That even if the government wants to decarbonise the grid, Britain is going to have to invest in new gas plants, and unabated ones, i.e. not fitted with the carbon capture and storage CCS technology at that. So we need normal gas stations and we have to invest in new ones because the scheduled ones for closure have to be replaced and more. Because the CCS ones, the ones that bury the CO2, use a lot of their energy to do that, you'd have to almost double the number of gas stations if you were going to do that and bury it. So in the end, it's normal gas stations as backup. This report has a section on long-term energy storage, and what they mean by long-term and I mean by long-term are very different. I always take in many of my videos as a classic example of long-term the 9 days we had in September 2018 when we had no power from wind at all really. And that came to needing, to give you the numbers, around about 7,200 gigawatt hours. That's the sort of amount we're looking at. Now, I was also a water resource engineer for in Greater Turver Authority for the Norwich Power Station when it was built in the 70s, and that gave a 9.1 gigawatt hours, that's the amount, and it could output at 1.7 gigawatts. So it could last 5 or 6 hours, that sort of length of time. Only meant to taking care of little peaks during the day and things, not meant for long-term energy storage. And so you need to understand this. And to give you an idea for the period in 2018 when we had 9 days without any wind, and I just take that as one example. There are far worse examples, but they're harder to explain. But we'll take the 9 days, around about 7,200 gigawatt hours at current levels. It would be needed, 7,200. To Norwich contributes 9.1. And if you go for the bigger ones being built in Scotland and everything like this, pump storage, you may get up to 12, you may get up to 40, you may get up to 50, but leading 7,200. So these pump storage is not long-term really, and it shouldn't be seen as that. And nor are batteries, of course, extremely expensive, but they do have the one factor, which is they can react fast. So when we're going to look at this next section in the report, I think they've got it fundamentally wrong. On top of long-term storage, like I mentioned, for the 9 days, you have year to year. Wind can vary, like we had a very low wind year in 2019. Wind can vary by up to 20% between the years. So if you're basing, your energy on something, and the next year you're 20% down, you can't manage that. It's very difficult. You need real long term. And the only thing that can come in then is to turn on your gas and power the system with your gas. That is what's going to be needed. There's no way out of this. So I really don't think they've got this next, well, I know they haven't got this next section right, where they talk about long-term storage. So let's see what they say. As I read this paragraph on long-term energy storage, I will interrupt it just to make a few comments as we proceed. Long-duration energy storage, LDES, such as pumped hydro storage and liquid air, are particularly important for longer-term flexibility and additional operability needs, such as during extended periods of wind drought or to spread demand between weekend and weekdays. I'm sorry, this is my comment, there's no chance of that. You're talking there about just a day or two. Wind droughts can be for 10 days. We had that 9-day one I use as the example, where we need 7,200 gigawatt hours. So as we proceed in, just think of that 7,200 just for that one occasion, because what they're talking about is next to nothing. The pipeline for options ready to deploy by 2030 is limited. Well, you can say that again. And our analysis sees capacity potentially increase from 3 gigawatts in 2023. So the total output, not the gigawatt hours, the output that's available for a few hours in today or 2023 is just 3 gigawatts, and they want to increase that to 5 to 8 gigawatt. So they want to more than double, almost treble the De Norwich size. That takes a decade or more even to do that, but it's still tiny. In terms of gigawatt hours, they're talking there to go growing from 28 gigawatt hours to 81 to 99. Let's take the 99. You need 7,200. I mean, it's nothing compared to the needs. This would require completion of the Great Britain's first pumped hydro stations in more than 40 years. Hydro stations that take ages. This is just pie in the sky. We've got 5 years. It's nonsense. Pumped hydro is a mature technology, I agree, and whilst work started on some sites, the rest would need to commence urgently if they are to be operational by 2030. So that's not going to happen, by the way. It takes a long time to do this sort of thing, and De Norwich took years. Anyway, particularly given complex workforce requirements and the need to manage the impacts to local infrastructure and communities. New and innovative LDES, liquid air compressed and longer duration batteries, 10 plus hours, that's nothing. We're talking about the need of 150, 200 hours. But never mind, projects have successfully operated at a small scale. Workers started on new projects and feedback from stakeholders was that the lower range is within what they can build by 2030. This is madness. And what I put there by comment is pie in the sky. It takes many years to get very little at great cost, forgetting what the prime purpose of pump storage is, which is for very short duration top-up, not for long-term. And to finish off with the last paragraph, stakeholders welcome deployment of LDES. Well, of course they do. They make money out of it. As long as they make the money, put the cash in their pocket, they're away. And believe there could also be potential in redeveloping former hydropower stations across the country. Now, the fact is, by the way, that hydropower in the UK is pretty all maxed out already. We're not like Norway, which has a lot of it. And it's a great source of energy, by the way. This is not pump storage now. This is water from the actual flow of water down rivers. It was noted that decision-making on funding mechanisms would need to speed up to accelerate the delivery. Yeah, they're waiting for the big cash cow to cough up, and we'll be coming to that. Well, this is our next paragraph to dissect from the report. Our clean power pathways see a 4 to 5-fold increase in demand flexibility, excluding storage heaters. An increase in grid-connected battery storage from 5 gigawatts to over 22 gigawatts. More pump storage and more expansion in onshore wind from 14 gigawatts to 27 gigawatts, and solar from 15 gigawatts to 47 gigawatts, along with nuclear plant life extensions. So let's dissect that now. So in that very first sentence, they talk about demand flexibility. What is it? It's rationing electricity. You see, they're going to ration electricity and increase this 4 to 5-fold. Now, there's no way that you're going to do this voluntary. There is no way you're going to do it voluntary. So what they're going to do, unlike now where you've got overnight electricity, sometimes you get it cheaper. That's great. I'm all for that. But it won't be like that. It'll be really penalising you in the day to using it at all, and even lifting the price at night, because the whole thing is to do with rationing to avoid blackouts. And this is madness for a modern economy. This is making us a third world country. So don't swallow things like demand flexibility. It's rationing electricity. That's what's heading our way. I've installed a generator. It only does 6.5 kilowatts peak, 5.5 kilowatts regular, as it were. Does it to a high quality, and that will cut in if we have a cut-off, because that's the only way I can see to avoid this madness. But that is what they're talking about here, and they're dressing it up. This next section from that paragraph is on battery storage. Connected battery storage from 5 gigawatts to over 22 gigawatts. That's meaningless. It should be in gigawatt hours to measure storage. That's the rate of output, but how long does it last? I mean, our largest battery farm in the UK, I think, is just under 1/5 of a gigawatt in terms gigawatt hours, and can last maybe a minute or two on the grid if it supplied the whole grid. It can last for 2 hours at less than a tenth of a gigawatt. And we need an average around about 40, an average is 40 gigawatts demand on the grid today. In the future, it'll be much higher. So these are just token amounts. And if we did proper battery storage for the wind on that 9-day scenario I keep harping on about, it would cost $3.5 trillion. It's hugely expensive. And they're not even expressing it right here because I can't tell what they mean. If they just said how many gigawatt hours, then I can calculate how much storage they've got and how long it would last and what percentage you would supply. But they don't do that. This is childish. So it also says they're going to take onshore wind from 14 gigawatts to 27 gigawatts. So just about a doubling. And they're going to treble offshore, by the way. But those aren't real figures, by the way. I mean, they're just the nameplate. They're just the size of the turbine. It doesn't give you the power. If you want a reasonable figure there, if you take about 30% of that, that is what you'll get. That's the sort of typical load factor. You get 40% of that offshore, and you get about 27-28% onshore of that. So just to put that figure right. Now, I could go on for a long time about this report. It's gobbledygook. It requires miracles. Their plan includes getting carbon capture to work. It's failed everywhere else in the world. It includes getting hydrogen to work, and I've already made a video on how silly all that is. It involves a transfer over of all sorts of things in the system which are not possible, and all within 5 years. But there's 2 big points I'm going to make before I finish the video. And one is this. I've been warning in the past in videos about constraint payments. Now, at the moment, if there's too much wind when we don't need it, say overnight, we have to pay for them to shut down because all the wind farms, offshore and onshore, are paid for what they could produce even if we don't need it, right? So, but as we increase this wind by doubling onshore, trebling offshore, taking up the wind, to more than double, treble what we have today, hugely increase it, then overnight it's windy and we can't use it. There's no means of storing it. So unless all these miracle things are going to happen within 5 years, we're going to be into a problem of eye-watering constraint payments. In other words, you're going to be paying 3 or 4 times the amount of money for energy you can't use, and you have to pay it all to switch off. So this problem is going to be enormous, and they've actually recognised this in the report. Just look at this here. David Turver wrote a report on this NESO report, and he makes a number of points. I'll start with this first point, and then we'll go on to his other points. The link to his report is in the description below this video. As even his own head of Mission Control, Chris Stark, acknowledges, all planned transmission network projects must be built on time. If Ed doesn't deliver, then consumers will be on the hook for billions of pounds in constraint payments, where we pay wind farms to simply switch off and sit idle. Despite building more offshore wind than any other country bar China, we would need to contract as much offshore wind capacity in the next 1 to 2 years as in the last 6 combined. These targets are impossible, but let's look at what this comment on the report goes on to say. The announcement would have us believe, 1, spending 44 to 48 billion pounds per year, and that's in the report, or 264 to 290 billion by 2030 is achievable. This is over 4 times the average rate from 2020 to 2024. So to expand on that, that works out at the 48 billion pounds a year level to £1,560 for every single household every year in the UK. Unfortunately, that is only part of the cost. More will be explained later. But just for this plan, which is absurd and doesn't fully cost all the costs, it's £1,560 per household per year. Their plan is cheaper because gas prices will be above OBR estimates and carbon prices will rise nearly fourfold. Let me explain that. The actual gas price today, and by the way, there's a glut coming which is going to lower this, but as of today, it's about £54 per megawatt hour. But it's reported to you as £114 because they add a carbon tax to make it that. So the real cost is only £54. It makes it by far the cheapest form of energy. And this is a lie when they tell you because of high gas prices, and this could really get much, much lower if we did fracking. 3, that residential demand can be cut by 20%, so they're going to cut your domestic demand by 20%, and energy rationing, ACA, demand flexibility, will rise nearly fivefold by 2030. I've already explained that. 4, the rate of offshore wind delivery be increased by a factor of 4, solar by 7 times and onshore wind by 5 times to 2030 compared to what's been delivered in the past 5 years. 5, we can install twice as many miles of transmission cable by 2030 than were built in the last 10 years. And 6, one of the aging gas-cooled nuclear reactors can be extended beyond 2028, and the first Hinkley Point C reactor comes online on time in 2030. But in addition to those 6 points, I would make this point. Carbon capture's got to work. Hydrogen, which it never has worked anywhere else, never been commercially viable anywhere. 80% have even failed completely. And hydrogen's got to work. I've already done a video. So all these miracles have got to come to fruition. And look at those prices. Now, what is the effect of this spending on you? Well, it isn't just the 1,500 odd quid per household, because all we're looking at there is the 20% of the total energy economy, if you like, because 20% is the national grid. But then there's everything else, all the petrol you use, the diesel you use, all industry, gas, everything. So if you add together the solar and wind today in the UK and the total solar and wind, it comes to 4.8% of the total energy we use. So it's less than a 20th of the total energy we use. And so there's all sorts of extra costs coming in the rest of it outside the grid. And those costs are just the grid. And so you could easily expect these costs to exceed 5 or 6 times that. So you're looking at £7,000, £8,000 per household per year. And those costs are things like forcing people into electric cars, or things like the extra tax on now buying a new petrol and diesel car, which the government's imposed, all sorts of things, the subsidies going into free solar panels, things like that. So you're looking at enormous costs here. But the other thing is, the report forecasts around about 11% growth in electricity demand by 2030, because as we electrify things, as it were, but no increase in the gas. So what they're saying is that level today, we need all the gas we can get, and we need that for the future, right past 2050 even. But as we increase electricity, we don't. So where's that backup coming from? Well, apparently it's coming from things like hydrogen and so on. So, but that's not proven, and it's extremely costly. And so it's all built on miracles happening, total miracles happening. And of course, in order to fit in all these things in 5 years, planning consultation is going to be flattened, stampeded over. Hence, the only way this is going to be done is by riding roughshod over local planning and democracy. That's it. They're going to call it strategic, and therefore we have to override that. I mean, have you ever known any project by government to come in on time? No. Well, there's so many projects here, not just have to come in on time, and we're talking about very short time here, 5 years, not only just to come in on time, but based on technologies that really haven't been proven to work, based on things that haven't happened yet, such as carbon storage. No commercially viable system in the world has worked, such as the hydrogen use, the use of hydrogen, how it's all going to be used, etc. All this is pie in the sky. And whilst they're doing that, they're spending huge sums of money on things like batteries that, when you work it out, only manage a few minutes of support, not the days and weeks we need of support, not the year to year. The way they've done the calculations is wrong as well, but that's yet another story. So there we are, and I honestly think that the only stampede should not be over planning. The stampede should be over this government's entire net zero plan. And now that America is changing, thank goodness, America is going to produce huge amounts of frack gas. And just like before, it's going to lower the price of gas. Already gas, gas at about £54 a megawatt hour compared to, take floating offshore wind, £240 a megawatt hour or £200 a megawatt hour, that sort of thing. Take ordinary offshore wind, £82 a megawatt hour, and so on. So we are just mad going down this road, and all I've been able to do is just highlight some of the points in this report. So thank you for watching. I wish I could do more on this, but I'm taking an awful lot of time now doing many videos, and I don't script these videos. None of my videos are scripted. I just put them together and do it straight out my head, as it were. So I hope you have had some value from this one. You're going to be heading in the UK into a desperate mess. And what I am forecasting is Milliband can't survive. And if he does, well, if they do try to get him to survive, and the Prime Minister's already said he's going to be there till the end of the government term, so he's going to be there 4 or 5 years. Wow, I can't see that happening. If that's the case, the government won't be there. Thank you for watching.